Tonight, I am speaking to you because there is a growing humanitarian and security crisis at our southern border.
Why should Congress cough up the money to build a border wall? One of Trump's claims is that it would help stop the flow of deadly drugs coming in from Mexico.
This is a humanitarian crisis, a crisis of the heart and a crisis of the soul.
In fact, marijuana has always been the most smuggled drug from Mexico by a long shot. But over the last few years, even shipments of weed have declined by more than 75%. And this trend has nothing to do with increased border security or a crackdown on the Sinaloa Cartel and its former leader, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, who was sentenced to life in prison in U.S. federal court last week. The falloff in pot smuggling is a direct result of legalization. I sat down with David Beer, a policy analyst at the Cato Institute, who wrote the cover story of our April issue about how easing pot prohibition is doing what the failed war on drugs never could.
Well, marijuana legalization in the United States, which really started with Colorado and Washington in 2014, has really shifted the supply of drugs from Mexico to state legal growers in the United States. And that shift has reduced marijuana smuggling dramatically along the border. In 2018, the vast majority of drugs by value came into the country through ports of entry, not way out in the wilderness somewhere. And if you look at it, as a result of the legalization of marijuana, the overall value of drugs crossing between those ports of entry has declined by 70%. So the president is not only focusing on a small share of the border drug trade, he's focused on a shrinking share of that drug trade.
Would a border wall have any effect on stopping the flow of drugs into the country?
Well, the best evidence we have for that is between 2003 and 2009, the Border Patrol built over 500 miles of fencing along the border. And that had no effect whatsoever on the drug traffic coming into the United States. And that could be measured both by the use rates in the United States or by the rate at which we're seizing the drugs. And not only did they build these fences, but they launched a drone fleet, they doubled their workforce. It had no effect. And in 2013, the Drug Enforcement Administration issued a report on drug smuggling, and they basically threw up their hands and said, we just need a lot more resources to get a handle on drug smuggling between ports of entry. And then in 5 short years, almost 78% of that drug trade between those ports of entry for marijuana has declined.
And yet we just had the longest government shutdown in American history over the question of whether to build a wall, and drugs were regularly raised as justification for building that wall. Do you think that there's a failure of emphasis, that the emphasis should be at ports of entry, or is there an overall decline even across the entire border?
At the end of the day, I don't think that the drug war at the border is any more effective than the drug war inside of the United States has been. It hasn't reduced demand for drugs. It's created huge problems both with our relationship with Mexico and other Central American and Latin American countries. And so I don't advise him to say, oh, we should just double down on the drug war at ports of entry. But if his goal is to seize as many drugs as possible, have at it at ports of entry, because between ports of entry, taking people's private property to build a border wall, I mean, it's not even related to drug trafficking. It's so distant from the phenomenon. So at this point, I would advise the president to move on, look at marijuana legalization, look at how effective that is, apply some lessons to other drugs. Don't double down on the border security drug war.
What about the cartels? How are they responding to legalization?
Well, they're trying to shift to other drugs and traffic methamphetamine and cocaine and heroin and fentanyl and try to make up the difference. So far, it doesn't look like it's been successful. The decline in marijuana smuggling has been so dramatic that the total value of drugs appears to have also declined, even counting the stuff that comes in through ports of entry. So it doesn't look like their strategy has worked, and so much so that they've actually shifted to starting to use these drug tunnels to smuggle humans, bring in people who want to pay a lot to come through the express lane into the United States. And so that's a sign that really the drug traffic that's coming in between ports of entry has declined by so much that they're looking for other ways to get value out of their investment.
Other than that use of the tunnels, are there kind of more complicated ways that marijuana legalization is interacting with illegal immigration?
I think these phenomena are very distinct. The president treats illegal immigration as largely a phenomenon of drug smugglers coming into the United States. That's not the reality. Only a very, very tiny fraction of people who are coming in are drug smugglers, and that's according to the Border Patrol's own statistics on this issue. If you look at just the gang members that they've arrested along the border, just constitute less than 0.5% of all of their apprehensions. So the vast majority of people crossing the border into the United States are not drug traffickers. They're families trying to reunite with family in the United States. They're workers trying to fulfill labor demand north of the border.
The biggest kind of bugaboo in this question right now is El Chapo, right? You hear this name a lot. Mm-hmm. Trump invokes him as a kind of an avatar of all that is evil about having borders open or letting people move back and forth across the border. I've heard the argument made that we have essentially created people like that with the drug war and with immigration restriction. Yes. Do you think that's true?
It is absolutely the case that we have empowered cartels along the border, both through the drug war and immigration enforcement. By narrowing the options for legal entry, you really empower cartels who are trying to control the trade. If there's only a few entry points that they can control, then that really gives them the opportunity to monopolize. And drug wars, gang wars in Mexico are driven by the demand and desire of those drug gangs to control those ports of entry, those limited areas along the border where people can get in. If goods and people flow freely, the control of the cartels goes down dramatically. They aren't able to charge smuggling fees. They aren't able to control the ports of entry. And you won't have the problems that we see and the control that we see by the drug cartels right now.
Would you say that the cartels respond to supply and demand in the American market and how easy it is to bring it in?
Whatever the market demands, the cartels will try to fulfill. And if you look at it from the Mexican grower's perspective, if the demand for marijuana goes down, it really forces them into a position of deciding, is it valuable enough to continue to grow it? And there's some very interesting anecdotes about farmers in Mexico who are saying just that. In 2014, as legalization is crashing the Mexican marijuana market, they're debating whether they can even continue to grow marijuana.
What's happened to black markets for drugs in states that have legalized?
Well, we have a spectrum. Colorado has probably had the most successful model for marijuana legalization. According to their government, they've essentially eliminated the entire black market in Colorado. All of it's now, homegrown marijuana. California has been a lot less successful, in part because of the regulations and taxes. Licensing laws in particular have been an obstacle to getting legal marijuana to replace the illicit forms. And Washington, somewhere in the middle, Nevada, somewhere in the middle, Alaska, again, would fall somewhere in the middle, where they've had a lot of success, but not full success as a result of some of the regulations and licensing requirements that impede full penetration of the illicit market.
Are there lessons for people who want to reduce or end the pathologies around illegal immigration from the process that we've just gone through, the political process of legalizing marijuana?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at what happened with marijuana legalization, it reduced the demand for illicit marijuana. And that's the exact same thing that we want to do in the illegal immigration space. If you make it easier for people to immigrate legally, that reduces the demand to get smuggled across the border or to enter illegally. And that's exactly what we do not have in the US immigration system right now, which is a legal pathway for people without a college degree to come to the United States and work year-round in industries where their labor is being demanded. And if we had that process for people to come legally, you wouldn't see the illegal immigration that we have now. The people who are being apprehended by Border Patrol between ports of entry right now are overwhelmingly, according to Border Patrol, coming to reunite with family, coming to work in the United States, coming for peaceful purposes.